Welcome to Moonbase 2.
Hello everyone and welcome to a special episode of the Moonbase 2, and I'm going to stop it there because I'm going to hand over the introduction to another man who probably has done it at least as much as I have over the years. So away you go.
Greetings, people of the interwebs. I am Kal-El Prime, and welcome to another episode of the Moonbase 2 podcast. And joining me today, as always, my man from the Irish lands, it is Mikey.
I'm always number 2.
Did I do that right? I can't remember if...
No, like it came back like a duck out of water. Almost sensual. But yeah, guys, Dave is back with us for the first time in a good long while to basically talk about a Twitter comment.
Yeah, excellent. When you reached out to me, I was like, oh yeah, that would be really, really funny. And then you messaged us privately and said like, yeah, let's do this. And I was like, I don't really have much more to say other than 140 words that I already put out. So, like, actually, over the course of the last week, I've been, like, sitting here really thinking, like, I need to have more for him. I need to really...
I've got hashtags. I brought hashtags.
Exactly.
But yeah, so one of those post and unpopular opinion comments came up on Twitter, as they do. And I usually just, leave a comment that is usually like unpopular opinion, Satan's not that bad, or something like that. But Dave, you left one, and broadly speaking, it was that Transformers comics lost their way after All Hail Megatron, ad-libbing. And that got me thinking, because I'm in an interesting position at the moment as someone who's not super keen on the comics right now, the mainstream ones, or at least the main book. But I have a lot of positive stuff to say of stuff over the years, and some negative stuff, and I'm very curious because it was the specific time you picked was both the time I started reading live and the time I lost a bit of faith.
Yeah.
From All Hail Megatron, we went into the ongoing era, and we all know how that went. So I like I said, this came from my Twitter comments, so God only knows how long this will be. But sum up your point of view for me. Give me a starter to go with.
Yeah, okay. So, I don't think, because I have given this a whole week of thought, I think what we probably need to do is, preface it, because, as I say, you can make a joke about, writing something offhand with 140 characters or 280, or however many it is these days, because they don't tell me characters anymore. They just fill up a little wheel, and then once the wheel is finished, I know that I need to stop talking. But here's the thing, right, is IDW has always been in this really awkward position when it comes to Transformers comic books, which is that, and this is going to be the first controversial thing that I'm going to say, is that they followed Dreamwave, right? And regardless, actually, even before I start talking about any of this, I should preface it. Whatever I'm about to say does not in any way, apart from maybe the ongoing when we're going to talk about that, speak to the quality of said books, but more the purpose of said books existing. So, Dreamwave comes out in 2001, and literally, what's the old expression? The light that burns brightest burns twice as quick. And literally within a couple of years, Dreamwave was dead. But bad business aside, what Dreamwave did was show that Transformers could be profitable in the comic book space, because one issue of the Dreamwave Armada comic book has sold more issues than probably half of Dreamwave's output put together.
Yeah, the Transformers books were pretty not only the best of Dreamwave's books in terms of sales, they were hitting major points on the charts that it wasn't until Mord Meets the Eye we even saw anything comparable. And I don't think Mord Meets the Eye ever hit number 1, whereas Dreamwave topped the charts at least 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, well, I mean, and this is just to sort of give people an idea of where we are. If we look at where is it? Let's just see if I can find it. Sorry, I should have been more prepared for this.
You had a week.
I know. I had it all of this time. 2000 would be about right. No, hold on a second. When did Dreamwave start?
2002, I think.
2002. Okay.
Because it had a 3-year run, and then 2005 was when IDW took over.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it would have been. So, 2002. Let's have a look. February. No. March. November. Where are we? Right. Okay. So, Transformers War Within issue 2. For it came in at number 12 and it sold 87,000 copies. Now that's issue 2. So if we look at issue 1, well, issue 1's going to sell a hell of a lot more than that. Yeah. Here it is. Transformers Armada issue 1 was the number 1 best-selling comic book for the month of July 2002, and it sold 145,000 comics. Generation 1 was number 2, and it sold 135, and that was for issue number 4.
Yeah.
Dreamwave at its best was probably selling somewhere in the region, I would guess, and this is purely a speculation on my part, maybe at its best 30 to 40,000. Right? So, and I think we can all agree that the IDW comic book series, for the most part, were better than Dreamwave. Any era you want to, no, it's hard to argue.
But
any era of the IDW comic books, you can, and when we're talking about that, we're talking about like mainline series, not your spin-offs and stuff like that. We're probably better than Dreamwave overall. I mean, they were because ultimately Dreamwave died, but that wasn't necessarily the creator's fault or anything like that.
Dreamwave ironically died in a pretty good creative place.
Yeah, it did.
Not never fantastic, but a good creative. Like there was really a good springboard for where it could be going.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll never find a bigger fan of the Dreamwave era Transformers than me.
Covers do you have? Do you have them all?
I have all of them.
Yeah.
That's literally what I spent my 3 years of student loans on. was because Dreamwave Transformer comic books was what got me back into Transformers. And yeah, but this isn't a discussion about Dreamwave. But the point is that Dreamwave was a massive success, and towards the end of their run, it was probably fair to say that they'd kind of fallen off a little bit because the collector boom had disappeared. So
Dreamwave got incredible. Like, I'm not sure lucky is really the right word because surely someone saw the writing on the wall. But the 80s nostalgia boom was in full swing, and it took advantage of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Transformers Generation 1 Volume 3. Hold on a minute. Right, so Transformers Energon 19, which would have been towards the end, if not the end, was selling like 30,000 copies. Okay, so it's lost 100,000 because it's because the fad has worn off over the last few years and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So IDW pick up the license, and what I think was great for IDW was the fact that they didn't finish off the Dreamwave stuff. They just went straight into, right, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to make our own universe. We're going to bring back Simon Furman, who is, the guy that you bring in whenever you want to talk about Transformers.
Mm.
And it's going to be a completely different thing altogether. And if you were around at that time and you were on the message boards and stuff like that when that stuff came out, there was an awful lot of backlash, specifically because of the fact there was too many humans in it and not enough Transformers.
This is all sounding very familiar.
Yeah. And so IDW did what IDW have done consistently ever since they picked up the license, and that is whiplash. Like they go into whiplash mode. So people kick off. Suddenly, the next thing we know, Stormbringer is a thing. Now, Simon Furman's gone on record as saying, like, Stormbringer wasn't meant to be part of anything. The story of Stormbringer and stuff like that was in his mind, but it was never going to be a series. And they've come out and said, like, yeah, look, they even build it as like no humans. I'm sure they did. I could be misremembering it, but I'm positive they were like, this is the one you want. This is the series. So Furman starts doing his thing. And then next thing they know, sales start to slump. And so they do All Hail Megatron. And what's All Hail Megatron? Well, it's basically the cartoon.
Yeah, it's the nostalgia approach of what, you were a kid, here's the thing you loved, but with blood.
Yeah, exactly. It's just here we go. There you go. There's all of the designs. I mean, some of them are based off their masterpieces and stuff like that. But for all intents and purposes, everybody looks like they did beforehand. Please buy this book. If you remember going all the way back to then, originally when All Hail Megatron was announced, it was meant to either be out of continuity or it was going to be something else.
Because All Hail Megatron is what got me, like I said, reading comics. Because I'd been reading, I'd been a Transformers fan active since 2004 or 5, but I hadn't been reading the comics. Devastation is going on. I hear All Hail Megatron's coming up, and I think it's a good time. I end up reading all of IDW, and somehow that morphed into reading every pre-published comic involving Transformers, including a number of manga that had only been fan-translated. So I somehow went from knowing nothing to knowing everything.
That's down the rabbit hole. Yeah.
But All Hail is announced, and All Hail is marketed as... And the end of Devastation is marketed as... Revelation? Revelation.
Revelation was
the one that got knocked down to the spotlights. But they both end with the idea that the Autobots are not on Earth because they have to leave. And this is a book about Megatron without the restrictions. This is how he took us. And it was going to be this standalone story about Megatron. And then when it came out, it's a very different animal altogether. It's a story about the wars happened, the invasions happened, the Autobots were beaten off screen, and then it ends like you said, it ends in a very G1 cartoony way. So it's very much not what was sold.
Like,
you know what I mean?
Optimus Prime gets better. He picks his team up. They go to Earth and they just beat the Decepticons. You know. Oh, and Thundercracker does the only thing that he's ever done of merit, which then suddenly turns him into this like massive fan popular character. So you can't look at...
Thundercracker was a weird one because it was the first time anyone noticed his bio.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is very strange. Before, I should say, he was always my favorite Seeker because of that bio. Always. I always, he had the best bio, ergo I cared the most, but I was always like, why has no one done anything with this?
See, this is obviously the difference. It's like, you're saying like, oh yes, he had the best bio. For me, Skywarp was always the best because he had the best color scheme, and so he was instantly much more badass than the rest. I don't care about his personality.
No one likes Starscream.
No, I've gone on record before. Starscream is probably one of my least favorite characters.
We're all Screamer.
So they pull the rug out of Furman, as you say. Revelation gets bumped from a 6-issue miniseries to a 4-issue.
Because it was supposed to be followed with expansion, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this is the thing. This is where IDW has always cocked up, is they've always pulled the rug out of a writer. Now, you also have to understand as well, like, the nature of comic books and stuff like that. And people have said this before, and I think it's true. I don't know how true it is these days. But this used to be the case that people who read Transformers comics don't understand comics. Like,
I think because like both Shane and Mike Costa, they both said that in interviews. In fact, poor old Mike Costa was so tired of everything by the end of it. He was pretty aggressive about it.
Yes, I remember that interview that I conducted with him where
he basically was like,
he was rather not happy about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was very, I would agree. Like, I was at the time I was reading comics regularly, and I still am. Like, I'm not very mainstream in my choices, but I'm still reading. And it was a thing, like, a lot of Transformers fans were in it because of Transformers. They didn't have any other experiences of the medium. They didn't have any experience of, like, event books or anything like that. And that's, I wasn't shocked at the time that IDW kept on rebooting, trying to find its niche. Yeah. Because I was just like, well, look at DC. Look at every Marvel event book.
Like, that's it. I don't think you can, like, there is a problem with like comic books in general, which is that you've either got legacy behind you or you're a viable product.
Yeah.
You're a commercial entity. So, for example, Batman will always sell.
Yes.
Superman will sell sometimes.
Yeah.
And Wonder Woman will never sell.
No.
But Wonder Woman has never been out of publication for 80 years. Why is that? Is it because she's such an amazing character? Well, if you were going to ask me, yes. But it's not actually that. It's the fact that nowadays we live in an era of licensing. And because she was the first female superhero, she is worth more because of that than because of any story that has ever been told. Incidentally, if you're interested, go read Greg Rucka's runs on Wonder Woman. They're fantastic. Anyway, that's the point. Like, comic books are such a dying medium that you need to constantly be trying to engage people and bringing in new readers. And so IDW has always tried to do this is going to be the jumping on point, or this is going to be the jumping on point, or actually, you know what? You don't have to have read any of Furman's run. Now, I often think that the reason that Furman's run fell so sharply off the cliff was because IDW, I don't know whether or not this was, and I'm not blaming anybody here. I don't know whether or not this has got anything to do with EJ's ability to draw on a regular basis, or whatever it might be. But it's the fact that you literally had to wait 6 months for the next part of the story. You got 6 months worth of comics, and then you got 6 months worth of spotlights. But then, and that was it. It was like you still had to wait 6 months for the next chapter of the Dreamwave ongoing series. Even though they were publishing 12 issues a year, you weren't getting a complete full story, and you were having to wait. Now, I don't know whether or not that affected it at all or not, or whether it was just the fact that ultimately, like, people didn't feel the love for the early IDW stuff. Now, personally, for me, I think what Furman established in that early run of IDW is one of the most unique takes on Transformers that we've had in a very, very long time. The idea of this kind of Transformers Cold War. So anyway, so they reboot it, and they go to All Hail Megatron, and it is very much just, this is Transformers, blah 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 blah. And I think this is something that I don't know about at all, and I'm purely speculating at this point. But obviously, at some point during the development of All Hail Megatron, they realize that, oh bugger, people aren't happy with this. And so
Around issue
basically
6 or 7 is usually the issue people said something happened.
So they make this decision that they're going to finally give people what they want, which is an ongoing, but they're not going to bring Shane McCarthy back, who's the writer of All Hail Megatron. Instead, they're going to bring in Costa. Now, Costa obviously is kind of the big thing in IDW because he's done this. He did the G.I. Joe book.
And that was like rave reviews. It was very, very popular.
Exactly.
Still never read it, actually. I've been meaning to for years, but just never sat down to it.
Only G.I. Joe comic I ever read. So I have no basis by which to say it's really good or not. I enjoy it, but as somebody who literally knows about like 5 or 6 G.I. Joe characters,
you know. Cat is
crying. You what?
May Cat from the Cyberverse writer, she's a massive G.I. Joe fan.
She is, yes.
She's just sitting there going like, you shame us all.
So they go with Costa, who's obviously the hot thing at the minute. Now, obviously, Costa, we can talk about it and stuff like that, but he's talked about it himself. He had great problems writing Transformers. And yet, he wrote it for, like, 3 years? Ish?
Almost, because the last quarter of it was more a James book than a Mike book.
Yeah, well, that's very true. But what happens is, sorry, I feel like this is turning into a massive history lesson. but what happens is, while Costa's book is going on, a couple of months in, they drop this little thing called Last Stand of the Wreckers.
Yeah.
And that changes the game entirely. Last Stand of the Wreckers and Spotlight Prowl basically change everything. And suddenly the direction is decided. Now, I don't know whether or not there was ever any issue between what was the name of the editor at the time?
Oh, Schmitty.
I don't know if there was ever an issue between Schmitty and Roach. I've never asked Nick.
No, but he did seem to have an issue with everyone, so you could probably put some money down.
Yeah, it was just always kind of this thing where, like, you know, it took, 5 years for the sequel of Last Stand of the Wreckers to come out or something like that? Something ridiculous.
It was...
Yeah, like...
Mid-season 2 of Phase 2. So, yeah, it would have been 5 years.
It took a long time for them to, like, greenlight a sequel to, like, what was, at that time, the most critically acclaimed Transformers comic book ever written. And so, when he goes off, we get James, and we get Barbara, and they go off on this giant odyssey. And basically, that brings us to my tweet, which is that ever since All Hail Megatron, IDW have lost direction and lost focus. And the problem is that I feel like and I still feel to this day that IDW are doing this, they're appealing to the wrong people. Now, that is a bold statement, so let me clarify it.
I'm just batting myself against the wall, and I'm just like, I don't know this man.
Transformers is inherently a children's franchise. It is a franchise for kids. If you talk to anybody who is my age, they will tell you that the original Marvel comics is the reason that they are a Transformers fan, especially here in the UK. And if you go back and you read those old Marvel comics, are they brilliant pieces of work? No, not really. Like, does nostalgia play an awful lot of a big factor in it? Of course it does. But here's the thing: Transformers comics should be for kids, and I argue that everything after All Hail Megatron was not designed for kids.
Here's my first question, and would you ever argue that the Asian series had a kid appeal factor, given the very heavy themes.
I
And
would
very, like, they were dealing with the Cold War.
Yeah, I would say that you could hand a kid an issue of any of Furman's Asian stuff, or even All Hail Megatron, and they could read it. And I know this because, obviously, for many years, I did the podcast with Amy, and Amy would read her comics first and then decide whether or not she was going to give them to her kids.
Yes, I remember that. She used to...
I've had stories, I'm sure they won't mind me bringing it up. That's how the Mapes brothers, Steve and Dave Mapes, their mum would read the comic first, and this is old Marvel stuff, and then she would make the decision as to, well, I mean, they would always get it, but, you know, it's neither here nor there. The Mapes don't have emotions, so it's fine. But, you know, like, so there's... I don't think there's a single issue within the Asian series that you can really point to where you would say anything bad happens that kids would have a problem with. Like I'm trying to think about like specifically violence or anything like that.
I mean, the violence is an interesting one because it's framed in ways where, just jumping ahead a bit, the later books, the violence is humans but with robot bodies.
Yeah.
There's fluids. There's like, so I loved once someone did a recolor of a bunch of Alex's pages where they replaced the Energon with blood and just changed it to red. And oh my god, the visual effect that has!
Absolutely.
I kind of loved it. I won't lie, but I'm a monster. But thinking of specific moments, like when Megatron takes out Starscream, he punches a hole through him, but it's like it's a robot hole. There's smoke coming out of it.
Exactly.
Six Shot hits Prime, same thing. Even when Ramjet gets taken out, the violence is portrayed like he's taking a machine apart.
Yeah.
I would agree the violence is, I think it's not less violent, but the violence is structured in a fashion where if a mother and a father are seeing you read this, they could say, well, you know, it's why they got away with Transformers the movie. Like,
I don't know. I think, and I say this with all the respect in the world because I genuinely love it. I think there are parts of Last Stand of the Wreckers that you could not give to a little kid.
Oh no, I wouldn't give any of Last Stand of the Wreckers to a little kid.
You know what I mean? Like,
forget about the violence, just the opening. Like, that is a book that is saying, like, this is not for your child.
Yeah, exactly.
This is for you, and this is for your friends. Enjoy it. Keep it on the shelf up there with Saga.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the issue, isn't it? Is that, like, look, we can all sit here and say that Costa's run was not a success. I think everybody can, even if we're being the nicest that we can possibly be, we can say that it was bearable at best and downright terrible at its worst. But at the end of the day, when Last Stand of the Wreckers came along, while that was going on, of course people were going to latch onto it, and I did exactly the same thing. And, you know, so I'm not sitting here saying, oh, nobody listened to me. I was totally part of the problem. And we created this Transformers franchise, which is in no way reflective of actually what the brand should necessarily be about. Somebody decided to take actual war and apply it to Transformers. Now, you know, when I was a kid, I didn't grow up with the comics. I grew up with cartoons. Now, for me, growing up on the cartoons, there was only 20 minutes of actual real-world violence that ever really happened in Transformers, and that was the first 20 minutes of the movie. The 2 seasons before that, Transformers were fine. they were just like two little groups going to war. It was just like tribal, yeah, like, oh, we won, yay, we've driven them off and all that stuff. And then you get the first 20 minutes. Now, I'm not going to argue the fact that In fact, I would make the argument that if that 20 minutes hadn't have happened, Transformers probably wouldn't be the juggernaut that it is today. I do believe Transformers, the movie, because it was so cultural and came along at the right time, that kids were like, oh my God, like that's kind of what propelled it into the mass. But anyway, we're getting I'm getting sidetracked. Yeah. So the point is, I think with the Asian series and with All Hail Megatron, you could hand those books to kids, and they could have a decent enough time with it. And they're not going to sit there and they're not going to pick apart the ins and outs of, as we talked about, like Cold War settings or, anything like that. What they're going to see is they're going to see cool action sequences with clearly defined good guys and bad guys. And they're going to hopefully have a decent time. And everything after All Hail Megatron has been designed for people who either don't normally read comic books or alternatively are too old to be the kind of person who suddenly decides that they're going to become a lifelong Transformers fan. I do not think there is a single issue of James Roberts' writing in Transformers that you can hand to a child and say, enjoy it. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, James was never writing a book for children. That's fair enough. But two, the way he writes and the way he scripts his stories are they're not traditional within the American comic book framework.
No, much more inspired by his own background.
Yeah, exactly. Most Transformers or most comic book series are 6 issues long. James would write a 3-issue one. I imagine like the editors, when it comes to James's stuff, were probably just like, can you just write a self-contained 6-issue?
I don't know. The editor at the time was John.
Well, that's just true. Yeah.
So just like self-contained. I don't think he actually has that word in his dictionary.
No, that's true. Yeah, 'cause John was too busy trying to figure out
everything.
Yeah. He was literally trying to work out how everything was going to fit together in this amazing glove, but never mind.
One day I want to see that man's house. It's just like I guarantee there's walls of pictures pinned on it.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that's basically the crux of my argument, which is just that, like, as good as James's stuff has been, as good as John's stuff has been, and as good, and I will say this, and as good as it has been for bringing people into the franchise that would not have become fans of the franchise. What I want is there to be a Transformers comic book out there that you can hand to a child or an adult and they can have a good time with it. And I don't think that's difficult. I think it's very easy to do that. And that way you have kids who are getting into the franchise for the first time get to read something and have a good time with it. And that way they're inspired to go to the shop and buy the next toy. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, Transformers isn't anything more than a glorified cartoon show.
It is in its DNA. It is a marketing vibe.
Exactly. So yeah, just let's just do a comic book that. Now it's kind of weird because IDW have skirted with this idea for ages, and I've never understood why they've never pulled the trigger on it. Which is, this all started when they started doing all these weird crossovers. And I maintain that like Mars Attacks versus Transformers is like literally one of the best comics IDW ever. But then they've done like they've done the Ghostbusters one and the Star Trek one.
It's the inter-franchise crossover. They're now like we're getting one or two a year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And those
and they are getting product to go alongside them.
Yeah, exactly. Those series introduce a relatively obvious lineup of characters. You know, you can always guarantee Windblade's going to be there. You can always guarantee. Well, she was in Star Trek.
Yeah, she wasn't in Ghostbusters.
Was she not? I haven't read Ghostbusters
she's
yet.
Not in Terminator.
Oh no. I haven't read Terminator yet. I'm assuming Terminator's like not designed for kids.
Well, no, Terminator is just kind of a take on Skynet.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, like I just think I think IDW could have done a better job of reaching everybody.
Okay.
And so that's kind of like where I'm at. And I like I say, I think that's the dividing line. I think, as much as I hate to say it, the dividing line is Last Stand of the Wreckers. Like everything after Last Stand of the Wreckers has been them trying to mature up the franchise that at the end of the day, like probably doesn't need maturing, because at the end of the day, it is meant to be about a bunch of robots that don't really like each other, that just want to whack each other with big sticks. And actually have a really cool and interesting play pattern. There is, however, I think one issue with all of this, and this is something that I think is probably the biggest issue IDW has, is that you only need to look at the current series of Transformer comic books to realize that it is being directed in some way by somebody at Hasbro.
His name's Mike, I believe.
Yeah.
Don't know his last name, but his name is Mike.
Because that's what the current ongoing Transformer series, it is just like, it's product placement all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, you telling me you really wanted to use Ape Face for that particular story? Are you really telling me that, like, you really felt that Ape Face was the right fit for your particular book?
Yeah, well, I've gone on about this in the main show often enough that I don't like where Transformers is right now in terms of either the comics or the toys. I don't like the brand approach, but I also realize I'm probably in a minority there.
I don't know. I would agree with you. I don't like the current ongoing series. I think it
has severe structure problems.
It does. It does. I mean, it's been going, what, 2 years now?
About coming up on it.
Yeah. So 2 years on a bi-monthly schedule. And we're just getting to the Decepticons. Yeah, I'm sorry. Like, I know that there is an entire fandom out there of Transformers fans. So when I say this, I don't mean to, disregard your particular view on Transformers. At the end of the day, I just want robots to hit each other. Like, I don't need some cleverly orchestrated plan or trip down the rabbit hole as to why things happened. Megatron is just a prick. How about that? How about we just assume that Megatron is just an evil, horrible monster? Because at the end of the day, most people who are evil, horrible monsters, are just naturally horrible people. You know what I mean? Like, people can be horrible towards each other. Just do something like that. Give us something simple. Now, what's kind of funny is that, as you say, you're not a fan of it because it's got massive pacing problems and stuff like that. And that's the thing that you can't have in comics. You can't have pacing issues because the longer something goes, the less likely somebody is going to buy the next issue.
Yeah.
You know, Hasbro is sticking to their plan because at the end of the day they don't have a movie to fall back on. The last one didn't perform as well as it should have. And so now they've gone back to the well of Generation 1, and it's just like, here we go. Now, for me, that's great, because I get all these... I do get an Ape Face figure, which is like, hey, that's cool. Like, I'll buy that. But, like, you also imagine that the amount of restrictions that IDW is placed under as a result of corporate mandating, you know, it's like, sorry, what? You want to kill Optimus Prime? Not going to happen, son. Not in a million years.
Or if it does, it'll get revived at the end of the series because the Power of the Primes thing was atrocious.
Well, exactly. You know, we've got another Optimus Prime toy to sell.
Yeah. Well, in this case, we have the same Optimus Prime toy, but slightly different.
Yeah. That Earthrise Optimus Prime was a fantastic toy, though.
I'm sure it was. I hope you enjoy your £55 box.
I did. I did. He's staring at me at the moment, saying, "Don't judge me, David." I was well with it.
Why would you say this to him, David?
Exactly.
I thought we had something.
Yeah, I just, like I say, I want a Transformers comic book that doesn't pretend to like be anything more than what it is, which is just fun, like you know, enjoyment and stuff. Simon Furman has just started his new series,
84 Secrets and Lies.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is it's a prequel to Marvel, and it's following on from the one-off 35th anniversary special, which was a counterpunch story of all things.
And it looks like this is going to be exactly the same. I don't know about you, but I've read issue 1 already.
Yes.
That is going to be and I'm using that as an example purely because of the fact that it avoids all of the tie-in nonsense of like Star Wars and all of that stuff. It's a self-contained Transformers thing. At the end of that miniseries, you're going to have a 4-issue Transformers standalone story. And I guarantee you, because it's Furman, and because I've read enough Simon Furman Transformers stories, that a couple of things are going to happen. One, you're going to get a resolution to the story.
Yes.
2, that resolution is going to be in about 1 or 2 pages.
Yes.
Because Furman's endings have always been quick. But at the end of the day, it's going to be self-contained, and you're going to be able to give that to somebody and go, there you go, read that. Now, here's the thing. I read that first issue, and I don't pretend to be a massive fan of the original Marvel comics. But I didn't need to be. What instead I was reading was the launch of the departure from Cybertron from the Decepticons' point of view. That's different. I haven't seen that before. That's interesting. I like that. Let's see where it goes. It'll be. It won't be a character study. Every single one of Furman's characters sounds exactly the same.
Always has.
Yeah.
But there's like what, a couple of distinct voices, and they just happen to be the ones he's in love with.
Absolutely. But you know, like
there will never be a book where Furman writes it and Grimlock sounds like anyone else. He's not capable of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, you know, it's, but at the end of the day, there will be a bunch of good guys, there will be a bunch of bad guys, and you will be able to take that book and you will be able to hand it to somebody and go, have a read of that. And I just don't understand why IDW does not make that the focus of their brand. I don't understand why instead of and I'm not saying like give the job to Simon Furman. I'm not. I think if you want to look at anything that IDW has done, it has broadened the horizon for anybody to take a crack at the franchise as long as they're good enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really good thing. But why do they keep bringing Furman back? Because at the end of the day, well, one, he's got a giant fan base, so that's that. But two, I think, and this is the important thing, is he can be relied upon to deliver a book to a particular type of fan. And that, you know, maybe that is steeped in nostalgia. Maybe you can argue that point. But at the end of the day, I would still say that you can at least hand a Furman book to a kid and say, read that, that's Transformers. Whereas, if you're talking to your mate in the pub, you can hand him Last Stand of the Wreckers and you can go, have a read of that. You'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
But one of those two fans is potentially going to grow the franchise, and one is most likely not.
Yeah.
And, you know, given the fact that there is toys on the shelves, and given the fact that there are cartoons on TV, it should be the kids that are the main focus of Transformers comic books.
Okay.
Thus ends my speech. I shall now take questions from the audience.
So there's a lot to unpack in this one. So I've been having thoughts as we've been going across. And the first one is actually based on one of your latter points, which is who is the target market for comic books? Now, and this is like not specifically Transformers, because there's an element of this, but for comic books. Transformers, the young, I rarely see a child reading a comic book anymore of any kind. My shops have stopped stocking stuff like the Beano and the Dandy. Partly because the medias are going online, and partly because children nowadays are getting their interactive media like via the web or via games, right? So before we touch on that, I want to touch on Cyberverse. Have you watched Cyberverse?
Yes.
Right. So Cyberverse is the children targeted media. And it is the one with the toy line. It's the one that is cute and engaging with the younger audience. Similarly, RID filled the same function before that, and Prime aimed higher, but it was still broadly the baseline, right? What interests me about your point of you'd like to see a Transformers comic you could hand to a child, grow the brand that way. I would ask the question, in bar the very specific lines, which are getting, I notice, more momentum at the moment from DC and Marvel, of this is your classic hero aimed at your 8 to 12-year-olds. Comics are no longer a children's medium. Comics didn't grow up so much with their readership. They became more restricted because as medium changed and as comic sales dropped, it became more profitable to write for your teenage to adult. If I pick up any book from DC right now, I will find stuff in there I find child inappropriate. Classic thing, I was reading Flash 750, and it ends with Thawne snapping Godspeed's neck. Spoiler. But
yeah, it did. Get rid of Godspeed. We've got too many bloody speedsters.
Yeah, but Wally, give us the Flashes, give us a couple of others, we're fine. But one I would highly recommend Joshua Williams' run on the Flash. I think it's made me more interested in Barry than anything else ever has. But that is not a book I would ever hand to a child. Not without is this child fairly mature for their age? Do they get frightened easily? Something like that. When I was reading Superman in the early days of Rebirth, there were stuff in there I would be uncomfortable giving to a child. It was more accessible, but even so. Comics nowadays, like Young Justice is probably the youngest aiming book out there at the moment. And even that, of the main DCs, even that is not particularly child-friendly in a lot of ways. It's teenage-friendly, but it's not child-friendly. The child-friendly comic book has become a niche market, and you'll notice a lot of them are tie-ins to cartoons. So, like my Friendship is Magic, My Little Pony. that did fairly well, but it was strictly when the cartoon was running that did well. The end of the cartoon ended that book. Cyberverse is the one that's drawing in the children. It is the one that is setting up that baseline fandom, if you want to use that term. And it is more challenging in many, many ways than anything we grew up with. Especially season 3. But, so even in season 1, we have deaths that you would not see in the 1985 Transformers cartoon. Now, people say it's because children are more sophisticated. I think we're a bit more willing to challenge children at times. Not quite to the level we were in the 90s, but a bit more risky. So my question there would be, while you could write a primary Transformers comic for children, in the current comic market, would that sell? Because children are not the current comic market. Comic readers start in their teenage years now and go forward. They don't start as children. So, what would your take on that be?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the mainstream comic book market, you're absolutely right, isn't aimed at kids. Because we've heard industry insiders in comic books say for a long time, like, digital sales don't bring in the figures that you would expect. Like, the physical medium is still the main way in which comic books sell. And those people are predominantly men and predominantly old. Like, so I completely agree with you on that point. But at the end of the day, you still need to bring people in at the other end. And this is what I'm saying is, like, there needs to be a happy medium. Like, so for example, DC have been doing these young adult books. Now they're I would say they're for an age range of maybe about like 12 to 14, maybe I would probably say. I don't know what their actual age is. And I've read a couple of them, and one of them was terrible. And one of them was incredible, like really, really good. And, they're done in the smaller size format. They're done in the kind of the more manga book style. And apparently they do really, really well because they get into bookstores and stuff like that. If IDW want to, like, move it and do a line that is dedicated, then that's cool. Like, it's one thing to give people the choice and the options and put it out there, but that's not what we're seeing, and that's not what we've seen. For the best part of 10 years, we had 2 Transformers comic books running side by side. More Than Meets the Eye and Robots in Disguise, or Optimus Prime and The Lost Light, whatever. Neither of those 2 books catered to different audiences.
Well, depends who you ask, but yeah.
Well, yes.
Broadly speaking, the demographics the same. Exactly.
Now, like I say, if IDW were to turn around and say, hey, look, we're going to split it. This Galaxies series that we've got running at the moment is going away, and it is going to be replaced by something that is more geared towards children. And when I say geared towards children, to pick up on your point about sophistication within kids and stuff like that, when I say geared towards children, I'm not saying children are stupid and therefore cannot appreciate a James Roberts written book. But what I'm saying is that, like, if you want to use Transformers as a franchise for, like, more heady topics to discuss these kinds of things, that's great. But that's not something that you're probably going to rely on time and time again to grow your child fan base.
But
so do us a young adult or something like that. I'm happy with it. But right now,
there's no option.
We don't have an option. Yeah.
like one, I would absolutely love to see a young adult Transformers comic series or a child, like a separate, like when I'm talking about this, I'm considering it from the point of view of the main book, but a subline I think would be a great idea. But what you mentioned DC there, and DC are doing their young line as their entry level. DC is a comic company first. Well, in theory, it's trying to be.
Yeah.
It's trying to be more than that, but every time it's tried, it's not gone. Whatever you think of the product, the financial side of it has not worked. Like it just hasn't.
I think with comic books now, you have to look at Marvel and DC.
Mm.
Marvel isn't a comic book company.
No, Marvel isn't a movie company that does comics. But
DC are they're basically licensing farms.
Yeah, but the point I want to make here, or at least the question I want to raise rather than make a point, because Transformers from its onset has been in this order: toy first, everything else second. And you could say like, oh, it went toy, comic, cartoon because the '84 comic came out first. Realistically, what made Transformers the juggernaut was the animation. Transformers is a toy marketed through a cartoon that gets a comic. And that's certainly what it's become. Which raises the question for me. It's like Marvel does have you mentioned Marvel there. Marvel does have younger issued lines of comics, but their primary marketing towards children is through the movies and the cartoons. And especially the cartoons and the movies as a whole now since was it Quesada who took over the animation department and just sort of made every cartoon kind of like MCU light. It might have been Quesada, I'm not sure off the top of my head. But with Transformers, the comics certainly in the last 10 to 20 years have not been the primary marketing vibe. Since the 1990s, with only a couple of years gaps, there has been a primary Transformers cartoon, which all the toys are then based off of, up until about 2006, where we started getting the sideline and stuff like that. And then there is subsequent fiction. So children come in, they watch the cartoons, they buy the toys, and as they get older, they then move to engage with other media. So, like I said, Cyberverse, for me, I would argue, is fulfilling the same role as those DC comics. Mm-hmm. And then it is those children as they grow up who the book are interested in getting in. I would also say, like, the fact that IDW is not run by people who are not, smart and very aware of their medium. The idea of young adult books must have been trotted out. It absolutely must have. And I would wonder if they looked at it and said, based on the numbers we do and based on the numbers our young adults do in other franchises, it just wouldn't be a moneymaker. But for me, I would just ask, for Transformers specifically, is our young base, our young lifelong fan base, more directly created by the toys and the cartoons?
You know what? I think so. Like, I think at the end of the day, they're always going to be your number one entry point into the brand because they're much more easily accessible. You can, you turn on, there's a reason Cyberverse is on YouTube.
Yeah, thank God.
Exactly.
By the way, if you haven't watched Cyberverse, I did 2 shows now. I'm hoping to do a 3rd on it. Please go watch it, people. Oh my God, that's season 3.
Season 3, man. But look at that. Look at that, though, right? Season 3, right, is and I won't go into too many spoilers here, but season 3 is a season where you can watch it as a kid, or you can watch it as a fully grown adult and go, hey, that was cool. Like, so in terms of just like striking that balance, I wasn't a massive fan of Cyberverse for that first season.
I think it had problems. I think it had a good core concepts.
Good core concepts that we'd seen before that were in danger of becoming tenants almost.
To the point where they are now becoming franchise tenants.
Yeah.
Since,
like
in everything else.
Yeah. But that third season, like I'm watching it, I'm going, holy crap.
I've described it as the bravest season of a Transformers show ever made. I'd include Beast Machines, because Beast Machines was not really a Transformers show in many ways.
Well, no, I mean there's a few shows that you can say that about. Master Force, for example, and stuff like that. Yeah, like but with that series, that third season, like, you know, if I was sat with a random child, I don't know where this child has come from, but let's just
having kidnapped a small child
and forced them into the cult that is Transformers, we could watch season 3 and we could thoroughly enjoy it. But like I say, I think it's that balance that's missing in the comic books.
Yeah, I would agree. Like I said, I think, like, leading up to what I kind of want to make as a larger point, but there should always be an entry for every kind of reader you can get, because every reader you get is a potential money making machine, and as a reader, everything you produce can be enjoyed by anyone. Like, if Toy Story taught us anything, it's that there's really no such thing as children media. There's stuff that can be engaged with on any level. So I think it's a good point that there should be something for the younger reader. And I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it take off. I think just because of the environment it's in now, it would basically just be G1 for kids, which is an ironic thing to say these days. But with Windblade, that would be it. It would be like, here's your G1 cartoon, more RC, more Windblade. Like,
yeah,
which is, I would say, smart marketing if you are going to pull it.
I mean, if at the end of the day you're going to market two distinct toy lines, one that likes the color purple and one likes the color red, then yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, you know, for everybody who rolls their eyes and says, "Oh God, it's G1 again," it's like, yeah, it is, because at the end of the day, they're appealing to everybody. Kids nowadays will still enjoy a semi-truck that turns into a robot just as much as their dad will enjoy a semi-truck that turns into a robot. You know, it was cool in the 80s. It's still cool now. There's a reason that Transformers continues to be better than any other toy franchise in the history of...
Yeah, and it's surviving as a toy franchise when a lot of other ones aren't.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it always will do, because it's three things. It's an interesting concept. It's a clever toy, and it's, you know, it's got the it's got that kid appeal factor to it. You know, it's bright colors and space weapons and all of that stuff. It's got all of that, and like, yeah, I think that's the thing is, like, at the end of the day, please remember that this is a kids franchise. And notice that I'm not saying like boys franchise, because
no, God no.
I think we've proven.
I mean, RC exists because the writer for the movie realized it wasn't a boys franchise; it was a child franchise. Like, he wanted something. He said himself there was no female robot. They said we don't want any. It's a boys' toy, and he went, "My daughter watches your show. She plays with your toys. You're missing an entire market by not appealing to her."
Yeah.
Like, that's a real thing. There's a very good documentary about the making of the Transformers movie out there on a few websites. But he you know, if we've learned anything in the last 10 years, it should be that this is such a broad appeal franchise.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And so, you know, give us your G1, your new take on G1, but diversify up your cast. You know, at the end of the day, I mean, look at G1 cartoons. Like, their cast was so diversified in terms of the number of characters that they had, that certain characters would just disappear for, you know, dozens of episodes at a time. You know, like,
or just show up for the one.
Exactly. Yeah. Correct. You know,
but they'd be treated like the cast is so large, this character would get a full-on focus episode, and then you'd never see them again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How many times did Skids actually show up too? Is actually the answer. But
Yeah,
like,
he was a chair.
yeah, exactly. Like, and that was it. In the 80s, it was about pushing product. Nowadays, it's not. It's not as crazy as that because you're not likely to get a first wave of 26 characters. You're more likely to get an assortment of maybe 10. Let's just say. So if you're going to do that, then do it. You know what I mean? But give kids the opportunity who maybe do like comic books the chance to actually read them.
Yeah.
And that's where I think IDW has kind of missed the boat a little bit because while they've been doing it with these crossovers.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing that baffles me. Like that is literally the thing that baffles me. I don't understand how you can do something like Transformers and Star Trek and how that can be such a very fun and enjoyable book. Why that can't be more consistent, you know what I mean? But without Star Trek or Ghostbusters or whatever it is. And ultimately, IDW, if you're listening to me, just give us the animated book that we've all been waiting for like, just...
I don't know, they gave you Regeneration 1. Yay.
Yeah, I mean...
I'm supposed to be the only one who hates that.
No, I you know what it is? Like, I don't mind... I have a serious problem with the second arc of Regeneration 1.
What, the book that said Simon Furman's tired of this?
Was that the one with a key?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was reading that. I was just like, this is a man who doesn't want to write this.
I thought the first arc, I thought the third and fourth were decent. But like I say, I have no massive vested interest in the Marvel universe. You know what I mean? It's like the Marvel comics. I am the guy that proudly proclaims that the Quintesson origin story is better than the Primus one. But nobody will listen to me. I will tell you why it's better, but nobody will listen.
Are you on that speaker plinth in London on Saturdays, shouting at the crowd? It's just like, you don't understand. They're robots. He's the god.
That's it. Why in the world? Why? Sorry, this is complete. But I'm going to shout it here. Why is the idea that a god from the beginning of time built the Transformers a better concept than the idea of machines going rogue and basically developing sentience for themselves? One of these concepts is a concept that we are debating to this very day. One is not. Well, actually, they both are. But within the context of robots, of literal machines,
I think I could tell you why when you're doing a comic they would prefer the former to the latter, in my opinion. But it also ties into a larger issue, I've always thought, which is, and I don't want to spend a lot of time with it, but it is that the god origin, or the born from the planet origin, or whichever one you want to go with, is a natural origin, so to speak, and that therefore makes them a species, and it makes them people. The Quintesson origin makes them androids. And if you're telling a story, especially as you, like, later Marvel stories especially, are more sophisticated than the early ones, where all this stuff comes in. If you're telling a story that is supposed to be a bit more about essentially robot people, it does legitimize their having emotions and having feelings a lot more than basically being, what if Data had enough of Picard? What if Data just went like, I'm tired of you sending me on the dangerous missions, mate? But that, if I was to look at it, I would say like that would be part of a marketing strategy. Basically, someone said they need an origin that suits comics. But
entirely possible. I've always just thought that the idea of just, okay, call them what you want, call them robots, call them androids, whatever. At the end of the day, like the idea of, oh, we created this technology and it went rogue and it's overthrown us, and it has now built a civilization, and now it is actually dealing with the ramifications of a civilization, and the fact that free will ultimately lead to conflict. Like, it is just a much better concept. But I appreciate the fact that I am the outlier there, because God forbid, giant big planet. I appreciate the fact that it's a lot cooler than an egg with a bunch of faces on
it. So again, something to unpack with the actual topic, because I can never stay on topic for more than 5 minutes. You said sort of, while you said like IDW really lost its way at all in Megatron, with the core of what one of your arguments is, which is essentially the who is reading these comics and who they're targeted at, you could make the argument it was really Last Stand. And I think you did, and I think you did fairly effectively. Last Stand changed the game in every conceivable way. How Transformers books are structured, who they're targeted at, what is acceptable in the books, what risks we can take, what not. Now, IDW, as you mentioned, IDW reinvented itself 3 times in the period of 4 years. Was that it? Something like that?
I think it was about that, yeah.
Yeah, going the Asian era, that wasn't selling. We're going to reboot again. We got another jumping on point. All Hail Megatron. That's only... That sold initially and then stopped selling. We're making another jumping on point, ongoing, and so on. When they hit Phase 2, we went 4 years before a publicized reboot. We had the start of the new season every 2 years. But that was in part because both stories were only scripted for 2 years. And John said he had ideas of what he would do if he'd gone on, but none of them were writing a story to be a full-on, endless ongoing. Ironically, Lost Light was kind of written that way and then got cut off massively, because I think he had a 4-year plan for it. In that period, up until the Revolution, Optimus, Lost Light era, there were no publicized reboots. And even then, those reboots were name changes. Very little changed about the 2 main books in how they were written, what they were trying to say, etc. I would say Lost Light changed a lot, but that was, I think, a lot of that was just bad pacing, bad structure, and a few very bad calls. I don't like Lost Light, if I'm honest. We made the point that certainly Mike Costa was said Transformers readers are not comic readers. Now, part of that was him justifying his own bad choices, and part of it was true. At the time, certainly, you could not make an argument that Transformer readers were comic book readers, because they weren't. The people didn't read Transformers because they were reading comics. They read a comic that had Transformers in it, you know? Last End of the Records was the most publicized Transformers comic of the time, possibly of all time at the time. It got wide acclaim in the wider circles and everything else, and it got a lot of news stories. And monetarily, it suddenly became viable to sell a Transformers comic to people outside the fandom. And then we saw More Than Meets the Eye and Robots in the Skies. They follow the same trend. They both go in very different directions, but they follow the same trend. And certainly for those first 2 years, the 2 of them are 2 of the highest selling books digitally anyway. And they both sold a lot of hard copies as well. And they are the most talked about Transformers books in the wider medium. Like, there are a ton of articles written out there about the politics of Robots in the Skies and the, oh my god, gay robots, and oh my god, blah, blah, blah. Well, like, I picked up the gay robots one because it's the first one where I remember reading an article on this when Chrome Dome and Rewind were revealed as a married couple. But just the character writing, everything else, what they were doing, as far as the comic industry was concerned, and as far as comic readership was concerned, you could no longer do what the director of Image before I think it was just before Phase 2 kicked off said that Transformers comics aren't comics, and he was right. He was absolutely right. He couldn't say that after we moved into the first year, and he couldn't say that up until the end of the IDW run. My thinking on it is that I don't think Transformers lost its way when it went past All Hail Megatron. I think it was a case where All Hail Megatron was the big signal that it didn't have a way, and that IDW didn't know what they were doing. Having talked to some of the editors from then and everything else, I can definitely tell you they didn't know what they were doing. But when we moved into I always call it the Barber era because he was really the oversight, and he still is. Like he is the guy. Like he has had more influence than James in terms of why the books are there. Like James wrote the books, John made it so he could write the books. But this is when Transformers readers became comic book readers, because we saw this big influx of people from outside the fandom suddenly reading our books. And you could see that at the conventions. Like the audience dramatically shifted. I mean, what was it? That article that came out there would have been the year before last, where a guy was saying like women don't go to conventions. Do you remember that?
I remember it. Yeah.
I ended up being quoted in it, actually, and not in that one, but in the rebuttal. I said something on Twitter, and I'm in there, because he was making a nonsense argument about biology, and I'm just like, that's nonsense. You're talking nonsense. But when he did the response article, which was him saying like, "Oh boy, did I open a can of worms." There's a huge amount of Transformers people in that article. Like, there weren't in the original article. It was a general comment on fandom, but it was like most like TF Nation's in there, a lot of the readership, and he came out with a statistic that the attendance for TF Nation used to be 90% male. In that year, the attendance was almost 50-50, either women and men or women non-binary, non-gendered and men. Like, almost 50-50 split. And in fact, I think one year it was higher. There was actually fewer men at the convention than anything else. Certainly the comic medium, in a way, I think it's been legitimized. Now, I'm not saying it like I actually agree with a lot of what you said. I think we need something targeted at younger readers. I think we need something with a few more explosions, because not everything can be the heady politics. Like, if Brian has some wonderful concepts, but his execution of them, combined with the pacing, is driving me up the wall, having to review it every month. But we now have a situation where comic readers are reading Transformers. They're making up in some ways a larger percentage of the readership than the Transformers fans who read comics, if you know what I mean. And I would argue that's a positive thing, because financially it was clearly positive, because for a long time they kept doing it without any change. It wasn't until late season 2 that the numbers started dropping off in a notable way, and then Lost Light and Optimus Prime never hit the numbers of Artie and More Meets the Eye, which is why we ended up with the early reboot. But so financially it was clearly working to specifically target basically to write comics like everyone else is writing them, because everyone's writing social issue comics now. Everyone's writing comedy, like witty dialogue comics. Lots of people are writing politic comics, etc., whether it's superheroes or third-party comics or indie comics or whatever. These are the hot button topics. Like, there's a reason Saga, I don't like Saga very much, but there's a reason Saga made a lot of money. There's a reason Rat Queen's got a lot of attention. Like, there's a reason Atomic Robo sells. They're hitting those key points. More Meets the Eye and Robots in Disguise both started dealing in those markets. They stopped targeting at us and targeted everyone else. And if we went along for the ride, that's fine. But we were no longer the primary concern. And I think in a way it does legitimize them. And I think, like, certainly creatively, it's led to some wonderful things. Like we mentioned Thundercracker earlier on. I can't picture a world now where we didn't get the bizarre dog-loving lunatic that we got. And we wouldn't have gotten that in a more traditional Dreamwave style era. Because even for any risk it did take, Dreamwave was very comfortably safe in its, hey, nostalgia. Nostalgia is great, isn't it? Now, it had fallbacks. When they have brought in the toy marketing into this new era, it has fallen apart in most cases. Because the structures of the stories are so tied into the characters and the plot, you can't randomly introduce new characters for toy sales. So you had stuff like the poor old Windblade book that got completely destroyed. The first Windblade book, rather, which got completely destroyed by the fact they turned it into Combiner Wars tie-in. Or you had the fact that John's books would be interrupted every year at least once, so that there could be an event book involving the new toy line. They never learned to properly meld that toy marketing. I still don't think they have it, because I think they've gone too far in the other direction altogether. But I suppose it's ultimately a question of what are you looking for from your books. Transmissions have voiced similar opinions to what I've heard you say here today, and I think ultimately, yes, there is a section of the fandom, a large section of the fandom, which is not being appealed to right now. And I think that is a mistake. I think you have to be aware of your market. I think the fact that this started as inverted commas a children's thing, and I say inverted commas because, as we say, that doesn't mean unsophisticated anymore. But whatever that started as, like every other prominent nostalgic element, it's not that anymore. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a ridiculous child-friendly concept. Ironically, started as a ridiculous child-unfriendly concept, but what we all think of as Turtles is a goofy cartoon. And some of the cartoons are more sophisticated, some of them aren't, but it's all goof. The IDW comic is one of their most successful books, and it's been running for 105 issues straight with numerous tie-ins, and it is in any way really acknowledging the origin of the franchise, or the origin of the success story that is the Teenage Mutant Turtles as a child juggernaut. It just ignores it largely and tells its own thing. IDW in general takes that approach with its major franchise books of, yeah, great, but we're doing our own thing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It worked quite well for G.I. Joe, for what I understand, when they were doing the Costa run, because that's what he was doing. I don't know. It's an interesting question, because I'm approaching it as a reader who ultimately was very satisfied with most of what I got. And it's very hard for me to divorce the idea of as you said, the quality of the books versus whether the decisions being made by the company are the right ones.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because it's not like, and I know there are people who don't like, let's say James's run, because I think James's run is the embodiment of everything that IDW eventually became.
Yeah, I don't think without James's run, John's run would have been as free as it was to do what it did. Like Optimus Prime would not have turned into the Prime we saw in the end of the Unicron story without the groundwork set up by James.
Yeah,
because
that's true.
But as allowed John the freedom to write it.
Yeah, well, as you said, and I think I would agree with this, is I think John probably took an awful lot of bullets to keep James's run as free as it possibly was.
Yes, to the point of it almost seeming like it was happening in another continuity at times.
To be honest, that Optimus Prime book is not good.
I love it. Love it. I love that Prime. I love that take on Prime. I love it as a character idea.
I like it as well, but like I say, it's the fact that I have to, in order to get a full idea of what's going on, I have to read 17 other tie-ins and stuff like that throughout the course of it. Blah 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 blah. And you want me to buy a a Rob the Robot or whatever. No, not Rob the
Rom.
Robot.
Rom.
Rom the Space Knight.
How
You
did you didn't read you didn't read Shining Armor?
Nope.
Oh my god, no, seriously, like forget about anything else. It's really good. It's an amazing read. It's
Yeah.
like the ROM is the one thing about that crossover stuff that never failed. It always worked.
Well,
And like also the ROM book's really good anyway, just the standalone ROM book. But seriously, if you my one thing from this, go and read that book. Starscream is the best he's been in years. So
I will give it a shot and report back. But
man.
like so James's stuff is like the epitome of it. And like I say, I'm happy to hold my hands up and say like I can understand why people would say that like James is the most successful Transformers writer in terms of just like pound for pound good storytelling and stuff like that. Now, but what I find interesting is that I have if I'm going to go and pick a comic book off the shelf, I'm much less inclined to pick up a James Roberts book than anybody else's, because I'm like when I pick up a James Roberts book, I am committing to at least 3 times the length of time that I'm going to spend reading. And the fact that it's this massive epic opus thing, which once you've started at the beginning, you can't just dip into the middle of James's run and have a very good time. Like that's not possible. Well, I mean, it's everything's possible, I suppose.
I would say with James's run, you have to have read it, and 2, it basically just like, oh, this arc was really good. I have to read this arc. There's no single issue. There's very few single issues you can just pick up.
Yeah, like issue 6 or something like that. The one with Skid and Whirl.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. The Fort. No, it's the Fort Max.
Yeah.
One. Yeah.
Stuff like that. That's incredible and stuff, and still, to my mind, one of the best Transformers comic books ever written. It's just, I don't know. I think what James has done for the franchise is incalculable, because it has brought in a group of people that wouldn't normally have been exposed to Transformers, and that's fantastic. And for that, he deserves all the credit in the world. But, and this idea popped into my head while you were talking.
Yeah.
Look at Pokemon.
Try not to, but yeah.
Pokemon, if you were a fan of Pokemon when you were a kid, you're still a fan of Pokemon now. Yes. 9 times out of 10. But you have kids that are fans of Pokemon as well. So it bridges the gap. But Pokemon, for all intents and purposes, has never changed in 20 years.
No, and I've had this argument with people and just like, no, it's changed so much. How?
What it's done is it's just brought in more Pokemon. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I have watched every episode of Pokemon.
I'm not. You sit there in your Pikachu onesie.
Exactly. But I suspect that if I were to Google Pokemon anime right now, I would guess that Ash Ketchum is walking somewhere to go somewhere.
I mean, you're probably on the money somehow.
Yeah.
I won't. I could be wrong. He could have to be getting married, but
so like there is a franchise that has, just like Transformers, never gone out of fashion. It's never gone away. It's maintained a massively loyal fan base, and it's managed to appeal to both adults and children at the same time, without any massive deviation in its core concept. And I just think, maybe there's something to that. Maybe Transformers can learn something. But at the same time, like I say, you can't just dismiss what Transformers has become in the last 10 years, thanks to the IDW comics. And I think that's kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning here, is my issue is not one of quality. It is a one of just give us the comics that everybody can read and everybody can enjoy. And that's it. Like, so yeah, it's a funny old one. Good, and you know what it is. Like, I've never worked in a comic book shop. I've I I learn a lot about comic books from the internet, which is always a dangerous idea.
Yes, I've sometimes stumbled on websites and we're just reading through a story and just like, oh, I didn't realize this at first, but this is the wrong website to be reading.
Yeah, like for some strange reason, comic book seems to be this weird cultural battleground, which I despise immensely. So yeah,
let's not turn it into that, because
no.
then I am just going to be telling one group that they're assholes and the other group that they can also be assholes.
Yeah. Surprisingly, everybody can be assholes, but nobody is the villain of their own story. But yeah, like try being better comic books. Like,
would a takeaway be in this for like your IDW? You're currently aiming at this market and ultimately ignoring all others.
Yeah,
in your opinion, they need to draw. They need to make, if they want to be the most effective they can be, they need to be able to say every demographic that we can target, we target.
Yeah. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if that's not viable, because as I say, I've never worked in comic books before, if somebody were to turn around to me and say it's not viable and here's why, X, Y, or Z, then I would always defer to, then you need to aim it at the kids. Like, because at the end of the day, it is a kids franchise. It is based on something for children. And I don't care how many 40 or 50-year-old or 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds you have got. If you don't get them when they're young, then your franchise is doomed to Action Master territory. Just saying, Transformers Redline is coming out.
I'm very excited by that.
It's going to happen all over again.
I'm sorry, I'm very excited by that. I want that Primarcy very badly. I hope she's good, but I want that because if it sells, we'll get a knockout. I'm convinced we'll get a knockout. And I want a knockout.
We'll never get another knockout.
I will find people at Hasbro. I will screw COVID. I'll pull up bloody Nigel Farage and show up outside their house. It's like, sir, we must talk. But yeah, Red is doing something I think should have been done properly years ago, but I think may have come in at the wrong point. Because I think Red is feeding a bit off of the licensing of stuff over in Japan, but I think they don't quite get the difference between the Japanese and American toy markets, if I'm honest. But I'll wait and see. Because there's a big difference over there in how toys are marketed to over here.
To be honest, I agree with you. I'm really looking forward to the Red Line, just purely because of the fact that I'm like, oh, I don't have to try and figure out how this works.
Yeah, I just look, his knees bend.
And doesn't he look good?
Yeah, he looks like, you know what? There's your G1 accuracy. Look, he looks like the show. Depending on which G1 you're talking about.
This is honest, and this is a discussion for a completely different show. But I think there is a very for all of these collectors who are my friends and my colleagues and all of that stuff. It's like, hey, congratulations, and enemies, yeah. You have spent 40 quid on this transforming toy. What are you going to do? I'm going to put it on a shelf in one mode. And I'm like, because you know what? I am exactly that guy. And in my brain, I think to myself, right, there are maybe 2 or 3 Transformers that I would, if I bought a figure of them, they would remain in their alt mode. The Dinobots, for example. Yeah. In fact, that's like literally the 5 Transformers, maybe 4 max, because I grew up on the cartoon, therefore Cerebros has to be his own independent character, all of that stuff. So there's 6 characters. So why do I need to spend money on transforming toys? Like, I'm fully grown up now. The fun of transforming a figure, sometimes it can feel like a bloody chore. So yeah, just give me the ones that look really good. That you know.
I was thinking that just because it's been a topic in the podcast, I was thinking like I'll take down some figures and transform them maybe once a year or maybe once every few months, and then every other minute of every other day is them just standing there staring at me. It's just like it's an interest. The psychology of that, like the Transformers collector. I was talking to Evangelist about it years ago. I'd love to. I'll probably try and do a follow up at some point, but it's an interesting. It's a unique beast among collectors. I've never seen anything quite like it.
Yeah, like because if you were in a Matchbox or any other toy line, anything else that doesn't require it, people who buy Hot Toys, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Hot Toys have got all this incredible articulation and all of that stuff, but you're going to find that one pose, and it's going to be that cool pose that, it's going to be that cool pose that looked amazing on the picture that you saw that you can't quite get. But it's as close as you can get to it, and so you're going to keep it like that. And then that's it. It's good. You're going to close your IKEA cabinet, and it's just going to sit there, and you're just like, and I don't get it because I can acknowledge the problem with it, but I can't help myself from buying all of this shit. So yeah, but anyway, we're totally off track. Point is, collectors are a weird breed.
Very unique animal. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, no. It's just overall a very interesting point for me. That's why, like, when I make what it seems to. This all came out of the fact, like, I make what people read as controversial opinions when I say I think Lost Light fucked up a lot of stuff. I loved Optimus Prime. I think a Lost Light basically took a lot of things I loved and I won't say destroyed them, but made them unviable, and then had rushed an ending that it stuck too much in. And I say that, and people are like, how can you criticize Lost Light? And when
I'll tell you how you criticize the Lost Light. You do what you did to Overlord. I don't want to live anymore because Megatron doesn't want to fight anymore.
Well, he's, bad breakups, man. It happens.
Just honestly, man, that was the point where I was like, get in the sea. Like, come on.
I mean, he kind of did in the end, didn't they, when Springer was done with him?
Yeah.
But that's a weird way to die, but it's kind of cool. But spoilers, Overlord dies. Yeah, it's when you put that tweet, it got my brain going. You're just like, what in it? This is the period where people will always argue that All Hail Megatron or Ongoing or both are at best troublesome times, but they'll never make the statement like they've never really recovered. And I think it's a very interesting perspective on this.
Yeah, I just, like I say, I just think they've gone into a direction which has been successful. Don't get me wrong, it's been successful, and it certainly cannot be overstated as being an integral part of the tapestry that is the Transformers fandom. But I just feel like let's take it in another direction and let's give some much love and attention to some other people. Especially now that IDW are so determined to bring in new creative talents and stuff like that all the time on their books. Let's do that.
Take advantage of the fact you now have a much bigger stable of people who are willing to write and draw on your material.
Yeah, exactly. It's go for that, but bring balance, and that's it. Yeah, that's literally my 140 character opinion in 2 hours. So there you go.
But yeah, I think that's a good enough place to wrap it up, Dave. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too, man. Let's not leave it like a decade before we do it again.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've done a show together.
Exactly. Maybe I'll finally read that Rom the Space Knight series. And
I loved it. And oh man, Rob, I've made a point like a bad comic is where you read a book and the characters talk like they're being written by someone doing an essay. Rom has that, but Rom sort of looks at it, and this is why.
Ah, right, okay.
Which is just something like, I have been waiting years for someone to acknowledge that sometimes comics read in a very strange way. Maximum Dinobots, there is a moment where Grimlock is talking to Slag, and I can't remember off the top of his head, but he says something, and I'm just like, I had to get a dictionary to look up what that meant. You have made an error.
Yeah, Furman. I always made this joke around the Asian series, was that whoever it was that got Furman a thesaurus for Christmas had an awful lot to answer for.
Yeah.
Because you weren't the only one. You weren't the only one. I always think back to the opening monologue, the internal monologue that Prime gives at the beginning of Stormbringer.
Mm.
It's just so. It's like Simon, mate, you're not writing Shakespeare here.
He's obfuscating. I don't need the
Yeah.
term is. But I know
Yes.
because he told me what it was.
Yeah. So
Anyway, Dave, yeah, we will definitely do this again. I'm sure we've got more we could talk about. As always, is there anything on you'd like to market, anything else? Because I know you've had a little project going for the last month or so.
yeah, we've got the big broadcast coming up, which is August 15th. It's going to be going live out on Twitch or at tfn.com. And basically we're going to be joined by a whole load of celebs. Basically, TFN isn't happening this year because of the virus. So, just...
I like it. I like it. You're just like, I'm not going to give it the dignity of a name.
No, I'm not. I'm not. So yeah, we're just going to do like a massive online celebration over the course of a period of time, which we will talk about a little bit later on. And yeah, we just want everybody to just come around, and hang out and watch it with their friends. We're going to have like I say, loads of Transformers guests on and things like that. And yeah, that's it.
Is there going to be anything like the charity raffle or anything, or is it just guests?
Oh, no, there's more than just guests. Yes, there's an awful lot more, which we've still yet to announce because I've yet to finalize it all. But yes, it's good. It's not just going to be guests. There's going to be a lot more than meets the eye with it.
Oh, no, Dave.
I know, I hate myself as well.
Yeah. You've also been doing an interesting little podcast. I check in when it's on, with a certain man who is a shark, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So on YouTube on a Saturday, we haven't done it for the last couple of weeks, just schedules and stuff like that. But myself and Skybite from the original RID, Mr. Peter Spellos, we've been talking Superman like for an hour a week, which has been kind of interesting because it's literally just came out of our shared love of the character. And
I found it very interesting as kind of a semi-outsider for old Soups. Especially the older stuff. I've got no experience of that, so I've been finding it quite interesting.
Yeah, like obviously we're of two very different eras, so that's been quite nice. On the basis of the fact that Peter's got a good 30 years on me. In fact, I don't even think it's that much, which is a terrifying notion. He's such an old man. Yeah, it's been really fun. So we've been doing that, and you can find us. There's a Facebook group that you can go to, which is It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's a Podcast. And yeah, we just shoot the proverbial on Superman every week. So.
Well, genuinely, guys, if you're interested in comic books in general and Superman in particular, it's worth checking out. Again, some historical stuff in there I had no idea about, so it was well worth a listen. But yeah, as always, guys, thank you for listening. If you want to contact us, the email address is moonbase2@gmail.com. We'll also take messages on Twitter, Facebook, Libsyn, Weebly, and everywhere else that Andy usually remembers better than I do. And if you want to support the podcast and help us keep the lights on, you can support us on Patreon. You'll get shows like this 1 week early, as well as interviews and any other specials. And you'll get the exclusive stuff like the Moonbase Woo Woo, which is where we basically talk about whatever random crap we've come up with in the last month. Last time it was the worst episodes of DS9. DS9, and the next one, I think it's either this month or next month, we're doing the best episodes of DS9. So Andy did worst, I'm doing the best. And you'll also get the extended version of our comic show, where we include a comic that is not Transformers related, or include a Transformers comic we just don't feel like talking about in the main show. Last time it was Transformers vs. Terminator 1, and before that Immortal Hulk #1, which was very fun because I got Andy reading a comic book. That hasn't happened in years. But yeah, as always, guys, thank you so much. And yeah, keep an eye out. Check out tfnation.com for any updates there. Dave has been working on this since the ye olde days, so I mean, he's got a, you might as well keep up with him.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, because I remember back in the old auto assembly day.
Don't remind me.
That wonderful time in the Hilton.
Yeah.
In the middle of Birmingham, in the middle of a riot.
I was drunk.
You were blind in one eye, if I remember correctly.
I still don't think my vision's actually ever fixed itself. But
no, I wouldn't be surprised if it did.
Yeah.
Like, I'm also surprised you survived. But
that's true. We
worked hard to keep you alive that night, Dave. It was a group effort.
It was.
I think you owe us a lot of money. There. If you don't know the story for that, Kal-El Prime on Twitter, I believe he'll be able to tell you all about it.
Yeah.
It involved a horn.
It did. No, it didn't. It didn't involve a horn.
Oh no,
it involved a pint.
It did. It was supposed to involve a horn, and then you put it in a pint.
No. I was handed a pint. It was literally, it was a pint, and I was handed it, and
like
instead
Gruff,
it was, and he said, in Gruff's defense, he said, "Have a sip of that."
and you're an ordiner, so a sip is a bit different from the rest of us.
Well, I'd already had about 8 pints to that point. So I was all. So the idea.
Oh man, it was just when you were standing behind me for like 10 minutes. I was just like, do I need to like lean just in case? Yeah, I feel like something's about to happen.
So, never mind. Yes, you can ask me on Twitter if you want about my eternal shame.
We're certainly never letting him forget it. But yeah, Dave, thank you so much for this one. Really, really enjoyed this.
More than welcome, mate. It's been great fun.
Yeah, and we'll talk to you again, guys. I will talk to you in the main show. Ta-ta.
Bye-bye.
You are now leaving